We're live.
Hello and welcome to Wellness Live. My name is Dr. Olivia Moses, and I am so happy you joined us today. And if you're watching us live, happy holidays. We are in the month of December. And if you are watching us live, please know that you can type in your questions live to our very own guest speaker today. So, as I mentioned, we're in the holiday season. So, we're seeing the lights and all the jingle bells, and everyone is supposed to be happy. However, there are many of us who actually struggle during this time. We have added pressure to be happy and jolly, but even though we are feeling a loss or we're in grief. So, we wanted to address that today, and we have a very, very special speaker with us, and is a friend to Living Whole. Her name is Dr. Dilys Brooks. She has been here at Loma University for 20 years as our chaplain at Loma University. And we are so blessed to have her here today to finish out our year here at Wellness Live. So without further ado, I'd like to pass it on to Dr. Dilys Brooks.
Hello, everyone. Let me add my greetings along with Dr. Moses to each and every one of you, wishing you the best of this holiday season. So, what do you do when everyone around you is filled with laughter and joy, and you find yourself in that in between space where, yes, you're thankful, yes, you're happy, and you're also sad? We're going to spend the next few moments reflecting on how do we find light in the darkness and cope with grief and loss during the holidays. So, three things we're going to cover today. Identify 4 types of grief. We're going to analyze the emotional and social impacts of grief, and then see if we can work our way to creating a personalized, culturally responsive plan for navigating grief. So let's start with a grief story. From the movie The Fault in Our Stars, John Green says, "Grief does not change you, Hazel. It reveals you." I remember in my young adult years attending church one Sabbath, and there was an announcement about a funeral. And my mentor, Janet Denham, said to me, "Are you going to come to the funeral?" And I said, "No, because I don't know that person." And she turned and looked at me as she often did as my mentor, with that look on her face of saying, "Ah, young one, you don't understand." She said, "Dilys, you should start attending funerals now, because before you know it, it'll be your friends who you'll be funeralizing." What a sobering thought, right? This idea that loss and death are part of our human story. I wish I could tell you that I did go to the funeral. I didn't. However, she was right, because not long after that, one of our young friends died in his sleep. Grief during the holiday seasons can activate feelings of loss because you lost a loved one or a pet, a job, or a relationship. And the holidays can also bring up the feelings of grief over the loss of identity, dreams, or normalcy. One of the things I realize in my work as a chaplain is how often we don't pay attention to our feelings and we don't name them. And sometimes, because we don't do that work, we are not able to recognize when we are going through or dealing with grief or loss. So let's talk about 4 types of grief that may show up for us. The first one is anticipatory grief. I have been navigating anticipatory grief for a number of years because our son, we dropped him off at college this past July. And as I thought about him leaving home, I had these feelings, these various feelings of sadness, anticipation, anxiety, fear, hope. It was just a lot. Ernie, could you help me out? For whatever reason, it won't go back one. And I sat with those feelings as he approached the middle of high school and as he approached his fateful senior year. And it was this liminal space, y'all. I was looking at him with such pride and such hope and anticipation. And then I was like, did I teach him everything he needs to know? What happens if he leaves me and gets sick? Who's going to take care of him? And we call those kinds of reflection an anticipatory kind of grief. And this occurs when you receive maybe a diagnosis about an illness, and they're telling you you only have this amount of time to live, or you're realizing that your life is going to change as a result of this particular experience. Or perhaps it could be this anticipatory grief might occur because you're looking at the economy and you're wondering whether or not your employment is sound or safe, or you're looking at your parents and you're watching them age. So anticipatory grief can show up based on a variety of things. The second type of grief that shows up for us is what we call disenfranchised grief. And this can be caused when someone experiences grief due to a loss, but it's not recognized. So you're feeling, as the young people like to say, some kind of way. You may not even know what the feeling is, but you feel a little off. And if we don't spend the time to think about, well, what is this feeling exactly? Is it anger? Is it sadness? Is it anxiety? We can't then trace it to its roots to then identify there's a loss that I may have experienced. Another type is what we call cumulative grief. And this may develop when we experience multiple losses in a very brief period. I experienced several losses this year, some related to work, our son going off to college, learning that my dad was unwell, and then eventually him passing in the middle of the summer. So when I share with people, this is what my 2024 has been like, they go, wow, Dilys. And I'm like, yeah, right, I know. That's an example of cumulative grief, going through multiple losses in a brief period of time. And the last one that we will talk about today is what we call traumatic grief. And this happens mostly when there is a sudden, unexpected loss or a loss due to some violent experience that one may have. So when we are trying to find light in darkness, you've heard me say it multiple times now, one of the things we need to be comfortable with is identifying what our feelings are. So when you look at this collage of pictures, there are multiple feelings here. You see joy, you see surprise, you see wonder, you see this sense of acceptance, you see some anxiety, you see some worry, you see that number one face, like kind of like, what just happened? Like a shock. Being able to name our feelings is so key. Because when we can identify how we're feeling and we can name it, we can begin the process of identifying a pathway for healing, a pathway to go through, and a ways to not sit in the feeling, but to begin the journey of healing and wholeness. So when we are faced with the holidays, it's a time of gift exchange. It's a time of families getting together, gathering around meals. And so often when people experience loss, we are often willing to come alongside them at the initiation of the loss, right? If someone has died, if someone has lost, or a parent is going through illness, if they're navigating their own illness, we will show up, we will send meals, we will send condolence greetings, we will text, we may even call. However, over time, we pull away from those persons. And I've often heard, have you heard people say when they're grieving how they don't want to be a burden to someone and they don't tell people how they're really doing because they don't want to be the wet rag at the party? That has to do with emotions, doesn't it? It has to do with the emotional impact of loss. And so often when someone is experiencing grief and loss, they're just trying to keep it together. And when they look beyond the funeral or look beyond the diagnosis and the holidays especially loom, they're trying to figure out, do I have the emotional capacity to make it through this season, much less interact with other people? And so the emotional impacts, the common feelings that come up are sadness, anxiety, and a lot of loneliness. I had a widow tell me once that after her husband had passed away, the communities that she had had access to were removed from her because the couple she used to hang out with, they no longer hung out with her because she was now the single person in the group. And she felt like the third wheel. And whether or not they meant to exclude her or push her aside, the impact was still there. She was isolated at a time in her life when she really needed the community, the help, and the support. And I have seen another widow whose husband died suddenly and was also left with raising sons. And I've watched the community rally around husbands and wives, just checking in and making sure that she's okay. So it's really important when we are navigating the holiday season to check in with the people who we know are grieving, to let them know that we are safe places for them to share their sadness, their anxiety, and or their loneliness. Another thing to be aware of is avoiding communicating with people during the holidays is not helpful. We can actually engage with them and say, hey, the holidays are coming up. I wonder how you're doing. Would you like to be in community with us? Let me come by and check on you. Extending ourselves a little more. And I know we have a lot going on, y'all. And so often, as we're busy with our own families, especially if we're not the ones who are grieving, we can overlook the people right in front of us who really need additional support during this time. One other thing to think about, especially here at Loma University Health, as diverse as our community is that cultures navigate grief differently. People of different faith traditions navigate grief differently. And so we must be careful, must be mindful that when we are interacting with people, that we don't project onto them things from our own cultures, our own religion that are not necessarily their own. Instead, let's be curious. Let's ask questions, especially if we're navigating or helping support people of different cultures or faith traditions during this season. So we've looked at identifying grief. And now I want us to look into ways of creating strategies for resilience and support for persons who are going through this holiday season. And as a result of losing a loved one or change in status or relationship, might be feeling the sense of loss again. Helen Keller says, although the world is full of suffering, it is also full of overcoming it. One of the things we don't want to do is rush past their grief because it makes us uncomfortable. When I started working as a chaplain, I remembered having to do clinical pastoral education. And one of the things we do in clinical pastoral education is to do a lot of self-reflection to figure out why we do what we do, how we respond to people. So I told you at the beginning that my mentor had talked to me about going to funerals as a practice in a community of faith to prepare me for when I would need to be there to support my own peers or navigate my own griefs. I shared with you that not long after she said that to me, one of our young friends passed away. Well, not long after that, we all experienced a significant loss as a faith community. One of our church members died during 9/11. And I remembered when we discovered that she had gone to work, she worked for Cantor Fitzgerald, she was in the top floors in the World Trade Center. All of us showed up at church that evening, and we sat together as a community, crying and singing and talking and just reflecting and hoping and praying and believing that she was okay. I remember when we finished that gathering at the church that night, that same mentor of mine said, are you going to come and go to her mom's house? We called her Auntie Winsome. And I said, no, I'm not going to go. And she said, why? And I then said these words. I said, I don't want to go because I don't want to be a burden to her. And that was just my young, just not knowing and understanding that when we lose someone, when someone dies, when we're experiencing loss, being alone seems really attractive to us. This idea of isolation and being away from people is really attractive to us. However, we were meant to be in community. We were meant to bear one another's burdens. We were meant to walk and hold space with each other, both in the highs and absolutely during the lows. So, just as suffering is part of our experience, we also meet so many people who overcome. It took me years. I came into chaplaincy and I did this work of clinical pastoral education to begin to navigate and articulate the importance of just recognizing that, yes, sorrow is real. Sorrow is part of our story. And yes, we should allow people the time and the space to grieve. And there is also the other side of that. So, what does that look like? Getting to the other side of grief. For each person, getting to the other side of grief, there is no specific timetable. We don't hurry people to get there. Here are some strategies, though, that I'd like to share with you to help us cope. Ernie, would you advance for me again? It's not working for me. Thank you. So the first coping strategy that I want to bring to us as a way of navigating grief is practicing self-compassion. Yes, you heard me, practicing self-compassion. So often we spend times comparing ourselves to other people. This is what I should do. That's the thing we say, right? I shouldn't be crying, or I should be crying. I should attend an event, or I should keep up my previous traditions, or I should act normal. And those shoulds are not helpful in any way, shape, or form. What's more important is to listen to what you're feeling in the moment. And so the coping strategies I'm naming right now are for people who are moving through this holiday season with a recent loss in your life, right? So don't feel like you should do anything. Instead, check in with yourself and figure out, how am I feeling? And be gentle with yourself. Understand that your feelings and your needs are valid, and it's okay to prioritize your well-being. Second thing, think about setting some boundaries. Boundaries, oh, they're so helpful. Suppose some of the places or the people that you're going to go to are uncomfortable. Or there may be things that will happen that will trigger you. If that's the case, limit or eliminate your exposure to those. It's okay if you do that, especially if you're early in your grief process. A third one, try not to isolate, but know your limits. So notice what I'm saying here is it's okay for you to be alone. It's okay for you to spend time by yourself. However, if you're alone the entire time, then we may want to reach out and get some support to just check in and just to see what's going on with you in that period. Another coping strategy is communicate, communicate, communicate. You don't need hundreds of friends, but there should be a few friends and family that you can lean into and say, hey, this is what's going on with me. And talk about how you're feeling. Talk about what you're experiencing. Let them know what you would feel comfortable doing and what does not feel comfortable. Other people are maybe feeling the same way, because we don't grieve in isolation, right? We have other people in our community and family circle who are also missing and experiencing the loss, even if they're not experiencing it as acutely as you are. So being able to communicate with one another and sharing how you're feeling during the holiday season is a way of coping with the grief. Another is to continue with your traditions that bring you comfort. Sometimes sticking to familiar rituals can provide a sense of stability and connection. I know my mom shared with us, when we moved out when we got married and left home, she was experiencing that bittersweetness of happiness that her two daughters had been reared and had flown the coop and had their own families. And yet, Christmas time for her especially was sad because we weren't with her. We weren't going to church with her. We weren't having Christmas dinner with her the way we used to. But she would still continue. She would go to worship. She would make her Christmas meals. We would check in via phone calls, and sometimes she would invite people over. So continuing with traditions, even in the absence of a loved one, is a way to cope with your grief. Another is consider new traditions or rituals. When we're faced with a loss, it may not always be possible to do what we used to do. Perhaps what we can do is create something new during this time period. Again, trying the new traditions or attending a new event or exploring a new place can offer a fresh perspective and a chance to focus on something different. I have three more. Identifying coping skills and activities. One of the ways to develop resiliency as we are going through our grieving process is engaging in activities that bring joy to you, that please you, and that bring comfort to you. And for some people, that's going for a walk, it's exercising, journaling, listening to music, volunteering. Another is identifying people you can reach out to. Remember, this is not a journey to do by yourself. I've said this before, I'm going to say it again. There are people in your life who would be willing to walk with you during this season. So reach out, ask. The worst thing they can say to you is no. And if they say no, now doesn't mean that they're going to say no all the time. And the final one is be prepared. Things may look different due to grief. There may be even a ripple effect of the changes. And these times of year may not feel the same. The traditions or the experiences may no longer happen, and people can grieve differently. However, it can be helpful to set the expectation that though things are likely not going to be the same, but by doing so, you can regain a sense of control in a time of uncertainty. What we don't have to do is to pretend everything is okay. We don't have to pretend that we're okay. What we get to do is to say, hey, y'all, this is where I am. This is what's going on. Would you walk with me through this season? So I want to transition to the final segment, but I'm not sure if we want to do some questions here.
Yeah, that would be great, Dr. Brooks. Thank you so much. This is such an important topic, especially during this time. And we have some questions coming through. I just want to remind our live audience, you can absolutely ask some questions in the comments section, and we'll try to ask them directly to Dr. Brooks. One of the questions here, Dr. Brooks, is why do the holidays often intensify feelings of grief, and how can we prepare for these emotional waves?
Would you repeat the question for me, Dr. Moses?
Sure. It is why do the holidays often intensify feelings of grief, and how can we prepare for these emotional waves?
I think for most people, the holidays are filled with joy and laughter and food and games and fun and reconnecting and connecting with people. And so if we have a loved one who has died, or we have a loved one who is unwell, or there's a change of status in the relationship. Perhaps a family unit has been changed, due to the end of a relationship, or people move. Instead of this time of year being a time filled with joy, as it has been in the past, now what you're dealing with is this sense of loss, right? This sense of foreboding, this sense of dread. Someone's gonna say something. They don't know, should I say anything about the person who's no longer here? Or this sense of it's not going to be like it always was. And so there's this longing, this nostalgia, this desire for what was. Right. And so as a result of that, especially when we're not processing and talking through it, a time that we could navigate fairly well becomes this barrier to our joy and happiness. And so I think one of the ways to prepare for it is to be able to name it, is to say, I have feelings in my body, and I want to know, like, what are those feelings? And as we navigate those feelings, we go, wait, I'm angry, but am I really angry? And by the time you do a little digging, you go, my anger is actually attached to sadness. What I am is really sad. I'm sad. You know, my dad, as I shared in the beginning, we discovered in February of this year that he was unwell. And when I found out that he was unwell, I remembered my younger sister saying to me, are you gonna go visit him? Are you gonna go visit him?" And I said no, because I made a decision that I wanted to see him, I wanted to remember him the way I saw him last. I really didn't want to see him deteriorate and decline. And as we're going into this holiday season, because my family system was not has been disjointed for years, there is some sadness that I feel, Dr. Moses, about my dad not being present anymore. However, that sadness is something that I have been reflecting on and processing all year long, right? And I was sad that my dad won't see um, his grandson finish college, right? I have sadness that he won't be here to see his granddaughter, finish high school. I have that sadness. However, at the same time, because I'm anticipating that grief and I'm thinking through that ahead, I can talk about that with my partner. I can talk about that with my friends. I can talk about it with other people who are also going through something similar. And so that helps to mitigate the challenges of this holiday
Right.
season.
I think you said something actually really powerful. This whole idea of anticipating it and calling it out. And so you're not feeling sideswiped or surprised by it. And that's not to say you're never going to be sideswiped or surprised by your feelings. But sometimes when you're in the middle of it, you can say, oh, I knew this was going to happen. This is what this is, kind of accept it and not run from it because running, it always catches. It always catches up. Another question that we have here is what advice do you have for people who feel stuck in their grief and are unable to move forward?
Mhm. So I'm wondering if the persons who are stuck in grief,
Mhm,
I'm curious about what kind of resources do they have access to,
mhm,
and are they using them? Are they in a grief support group? Are they uh, talking to maybe a therapist or counselor? Do they have other resources that can help them make meaning of the loss that they have? Perhaps they are dealing with what we talked about at the top of the presentation, a complicated grief. Maybe they have several losses that are intertwined, and so they're being stuck in that grief, maybe because they've just not had an opportunity to begin to process and unpack the layers to that grief. And I find that when people are going through that kind of complicated or the kind of grief that seems to just not move,
mhm,
now what they need most is just somebody who's willing to be with them and
mhm,
to listen to them. And so often, the best gift you can give to that person is to encourage them to find support, professional support, especially if the support that the family members or the loved ones are giving is not received, and they don't. There doesn't seem to be any change in on the horizon.
mhm. Great. Well, thank you. Let's get to the second half of your presentation. Thank you for those
Sure.
answers.
So we've talked about um, what types of grief. We have talked about the emotions and the impacts. Now I want to talk a little bit about how do we support other people. If you are in the role of support person, and you want to know, how do I love on and care for the person who is navigating the loss of a loved one, a child, a parent, or loss of their health? Then here's some things that we can do, strategies for resilience and support. If you know someone who's grieving, don't be afraid to check on them during this time of the year. reach out. Now, let me say this to you. Reach out if your glass is full. If you find yourself in a situation where you do not have the capacity to really hold space for that person, then let's find someone who can, right? Because you cannot pour from an empty cup. So that's the first thing I would suggest. Number two, ask them what they might need or what they feel up for, and express understanding if they need to do things differently during the holidays this year than in the past. Expecting people to just jump right back into the swing of things, especially if their grief is fresh, is unfair. So ask, right? Let's check in with them and see how they're doing. A third thing, don't just be open to listening to them. Tell them explicitly that you're prepared to listen when they are ready and or when they need you. So often, when we are engaging with people, we go on our timetable and they, again, if they have this sense of, I don't want to be a burden to someone, then they don't want to really tell you what they need. And listen, if we're going to be honest, we work in a healthcare environment here at Loma Linda. We have a lot of Martha types here. We want to get things done. So we're going to show up and we're going to do the thing that we're supposed to do. So as a result of that, learning that we have people in our lives who are willing to listen and just be present for us may seem unbelievable, but it's true. There are people who have the capacity to just be there and listen. Number four, respect their boundaries. If someone gives you a boundary and they say, hey, listen, I'm okay, I want to go through the holidays like this, then respect it. This doesn't mean you don't check in, but listen to what they have to say. And then after they've told you what they want and how they'd like to navigate the holiday season, then check in after the season. Just let them know, drop them a note, send them a card, send them a text, give them a call. Just let them know that you're still here, you're still available, and you want to be there to support them. And then if there are times when they want to be alone or things they do not want to do, honor it. However, at the same time, watch out for isolation or withdrawal, right? So what we don't want to do is be, a hawk just always hovering over them. At the same time, you don't want to be so distant from them that they feel that they're isolated and completely forgotten. So once we identify those kind of strategies to help them develop resilience and support, now let's look at incorporating spirituality and faith as a resource. Dr. Pauline Boss, in her work on ambiguous loss, says, when you acknowledge the pain and celebrate the cultural practices of someone's grief, you honor their story and their healing process. Story matters. Like, we need to understand people's stories. We have to be mindful that we don't go and care for people the way we want to be cared for. We need to care for people the way they want to be cared for. And so we need to know their story. We need to know what's going on in their lives. So, what are some of the things that we can do? First of all, identify whether the people that we are who are navigating their grief, what are the resources or practices that are helpful for them? Are they people of faith? Are these persons for whom religion, whether that be Christianity or some other religious practice, helps them to make meaning of their spiritual struggles or the challenges that they have in their lives? So for people of faith, things that we can do: offer prayers, perhaps lighting candles in their memories, creating spaces where we can share stories about the persons who have died, in community, so that we can remember. the Jewish community, when someone passes away, they do something called sitting Shiva. People will come and visit over a 7-day period, and they will just sit with the mourners. They will listen. There's always food. I'm from the Caribbean. In our culture, we have this thing called 9 nights. It's like 9 nights. It's this time of folks just coming together with you and being there with you. It's what my Auntie Janet was inviting me to do when my cousin Michelle, who was died in the World Trade Center, when she said, "Come on over to the house," it was an opportunity to be in community, just to remember, to tell stories. And over the months up until we learned definitively that Michelle had passed, we had many opportunities just to be in community together. And the memorial service was this big memory space where we laughed and cried and just told stories of Michelle. Perhaps a way to incorporate a new tradition is to donate to a cause that the person was passionate about. And that's a way to keep the memory of them alive, as well as remember them as persons and identify the grief that goes along with that. Attending religious services, reflecting on scriptures or sacred texts, relating to loss and hope. In the Christian tradition, the book of Psalms is filled with so many prayers and songs of both lament and hope and joy that just allows people to reflect on God's presence with them while they're going through the season of distress and grief, as the songwriter says. Incorporating meaningful symbols from your faith into your celebrations, remembering your loved ones during the holidays, maybe a moment of silence before you all eat, or as you are reflecting whatever other rituals you have around the holidays, a New Year celebration. Some people, it's setting a place at the table so that if someone shows up unexpectedly, it's in honor of the person who is no longer with us. So these are just a few of the things that we can do. We can also plant a memorial tree or a garden. We can create memory books with contributions from family and friends. You can establish a scholarship or fund in your loved one's name. You can host an annual gathering to share stories and memories. Other things are the practices that you can engage in. Host a storytelling circle where each person shares a favorite memory. Create a memory jar where guests write down and share a brief anecdote. Maybe organize a photo sharing session with captions describing special moments, or dedicate a portion of your holiday meal to toasting and remembering a loved one. Those are just some practical ways that we can keep the memory of the person who is no longer with us alive. Not talking about it is not the solution. Not talking about them is not the solution. It is acknowledging, hey, in the midst of our hopes and our joys, we do mourn and we do remember. Isaiah 41:10 says, "Do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be afraid, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will also help you. I will also uphold you with my righteous right hand." For so many persons who are going through times of grief and loss, if we're honest, there comes a time when we say to God, "Why did you let this happen? I thought you were with me, God. I don't sense you being present." There is this crying out to the heavens, this beating of the chest, this is so hard, God, especially for people of faith, this sense of, why have you forsaken me, as Jesus cried on the cross? And I just want to give us permission to lean into that part of our grief. We do get to say to God, "Why did you let this happen?" We do get to say to God, "I don't like this. I don't understand it. I hate this. This is hard." Because the scriptures tell us that God wants us to be honest and open with what's going on. Because there's nothing that you and I can say that would make God push us away. This is what Isaiah wants us to know. We don't have to be afraid. God is with us in the midst of our sorrow. When we read through the scriptures, we can see that God does not abandon his people. God is present with us. And so I want to encourage you, as someone who is navigating your grief and loss during this holiday season, lean into your faith. And if your faith is wavering, it's okay. God will be with you, even if you don't feel like God is present. God is with you. And I want to encourage you again, reach out to someone who can help you process through your feelings, especially around your religion, your faith, and your spirituality. And that's what chaplains get to do with you. That's what pastors get to do with you. That's what counselors get to do with you, so that you don't have to hold on to those feelings and truncate or shorten or short start your healing process. So I want to end with giving you a plan, a template. This is not a one size fits all. It's just an outline of some things that you can do to personalize and culturally respond to your own grief. And if you're someone who is a caregiver, or you have someone in your family who's going through the holiday seasons, and you're trying to this holiday season, and you know they're gonna get triggered, or they're already triggered, or they're already anticipating spending more time grieving than finding joy, perhaps you see this template as a way to help your loved one or friend navigate this season. So the first thing, we want to encourage people who are grieving to reflect on their grief experience, right? We want them to name the fact that they are going through a challenging time period. Help them. The reflection allows them to describe their feelings and their emotions. A prompt might be, what are your primary emotions right now? So you're seeing all the Christmas lights. You're seeing people, scurrying to and fro with big bags. What feelings are you coming up with? Are you sad? Are you angry? Are you confused? Are you frustrated? And identify what are some triggers that are intensifying your griefs during the holidays. Is it the realization that you're by yourself and you have to put up the tree alone, or you don't want to put up a tree if that's not your tradition? Or is it the idea that there are things that are coming to the house in the name of your loved one that you didn't even know was coming because they had planned this from before, and it comes and you're like, oh, so you're filled with both this like, oh wow, they thought about me this far in advance, and then there's also this sense of sadness about that. Another thing, number two, acknowledge cultural and spiritual beliefs. Uh, if you're caring for someone else, or you're observing or supporting someone else with a different culture than yours, then identify what are the cultural or spiritual practices that influence how they grieve. Or if it's for you, how does your culture impact the way that you grieve? Are you from a family that never shows that you're sad? Do you never talk about the feelings or emotions at all? Is that serving you well? You've already heard me say a number of times today, talking about how we're feeling is the pathway to our healing and our ability to navigate the darkness that comes from grief and loss. So if your culture or your family or your spiritual traditions are not serving you in a way that's life-giving and helpful, how can you make adjustments? What changes do you need to make? Another question, what are some faith-based or spiritual practices that bring you comfort? Identifying those goes a long way in allowing you to respond to your grief. Number three, what are the coping strategies that help you feel supported and grounded? Journaling, meditation, prayer, art, music, spending time with loved ones, or going for walks by the beach, going for hikes in the mountains. But identify those things that allow you to feel supported and grounded. Now, number four, let's plan and let's anticipate what might be some of the holiday triggers. Which holiday traditions bring up painful memories for you? What boundaries can you set to protect your mental health? Sorry. Can you modify or skip traditions that feel overwhelming? So that's a way of anticipating what might come up that might be an active trigger for you. Here we go. Most important one, I think, is to build a support network. Identify people or resources that you can turn to for help. This is not a time to do it by yourself. I'm going to say it again. This is not the time to do it by yourself. Identify your family, friends, faith leaders, counselors, community groups, and online support networks. Reach out to someone. Number 6, incorporate resilience, resilience building practices. Gratitude journaling, reflecting on positive memories. Those are things that help us heal and have resilience. Setting achievable goals for self-care and well-being. When was the last time you had a massage? Go get a massage. When was the last time you went and did something fun without an agenda? What are those things that just bring joy and laughter to you? What are those things that help to inspire your well-being or support your well-being? And finally, set an intention. I remember saying when I was first coming out of college and working, said those who plan to fail, fail to plan. Those who plan to fail, those who plan to fail, fail to plan. So plan, like, I want to move towards healing. I want to move towards wholeness. I want to navigate this holiday season, acknowledging my grief, yes, and also finding hope, healing, love, laughter, and joy. So set an intention for healing. Maybe write a short statement like, this holiday season, I will honor my grief while seeking moments of peace, connection, and gratitude. You see how that statement allows you to name that, yes, I am grieving, and it also gives us permission and space to pursue hope, healing, and to remain and to navigate that with gratitude. Of course, as I shared before, finding grief support groups, books, articles, podcasts, videos, recognizing that there is so much out there to help us walk through this season of family and laughter and anticipation of a new year, acknowledging our grief, acknowledging our grief, yes, and leaning into the supports that we have will help us to find the light in the darkness and to cope with grief and loss during the holidays.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brooks. I think this is such an important topic, especially for today. And I want to thank everyone who joined us today, because I think all of us know someone who have experienced loss. And, the holidays can be a very tough time. And while we kind of hold space here to acknowledge that grief, we want to wish everyone God's blessings as we go into this holiday season, and wish you joy and happiness, contentment, and most of all, hope. We ask that you be there for each other as we end this year together, and we want to invite you to our next session, starting anew next in January 30th. We'll be having Dr. Rita Amen, who's one of our very own Living Whole dietitians, and she'll be talking about carbohydrates. So a little bit of a shift, but if you're focusing on your diet, especially in the month of January, you won't want to miss it. We'll see you then. My name is Dr. Olivia Moses. Thank you.